Welcome to the first video in a brand new series called Faith Foundations, where we will be exploring the roots of Christian history, theology, and practice. In this video, we will be diving into a fascinating topic that many Christians may have heard of, but few fully understand: the Apostolic Fathers. These were some of the earliest Christian writers after the apostles themselves, and their works are critical for understanding how the early church evolved. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's explore the Apostolic Fathers. Before we get into the details, let's define who the Apostolic Fathers were. The term Apostolic Fathers refers to a group of early Christian leaders and writers who lived in the late 1st and 2nd centuries AD. They were called apostolic because they were believed to have either known the apostles personally or were significantly influenced by them. These figures played a pivotal role in shaping early Christian thought, and their writings offer a glimpse into the life of the early church, its beliefs, struggles, and how it adapted after the apostolic era ended. Think of them as the bridge between the apostles, those who walked with Jesus, and the early church councils that would later define Orthodox doctrine. Let's take a closer look at a few of the most important apostolic figures. First, we have Clement of Rome. Clement was the bishop of Rome in the late 1st century. His most well-known work, First Clement, was written to the church in Corinth to address a leadership dispute. This letter is important because it shows the early church's concern for unity and respect for authority. It's also one of the earliest examples of what we might call episcopal authority. That's the idea that bishops had a special leadership role in the church. Interestingly, this document was read in some churches as scripture for a time. Our second apostolic figure is Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius was the bishop of Syrian Antioch and is famous for writing a series of letters as he was being transported to Rome to face martyrdom. In these letters, Ignatius emphasizes the importance of church unity, the role of the bishop, and his own desire to imitate Christ in his suffering and death. His letters also give us one of the earliest references to the term Catholic Church, meaning the universal church. Third, we have Polycarp of Smyrna. Polycarp is often remembered for his martyrdom, but he was also a disciple of the Apostle John and served as the bishop in Smyrna. His letter to the Philippians provides practical advice on Christian living, and his death is recounted in the martyrdom of Polycarp, one of the earliest Christian martyrdom accounts. Polycarp's life and death remind us of the continuity of faith from the apostles through the early church. Our final key figure to mention isn't a person, but a document: the Didache. This writing isn't attributed to a single person, but is a collection of teachings and instructions for the Christian community. The Didache, which means teaching, includes instructions on morality, baptism, fasting, prayer, and the Eucharist. What's fascinating about the Didache is that it offers a window into practices of the early Christian worship, practices that in many ways resemble modern liturgies. So what were the major concerns and themes in the writings of the Apostolic Fathers? Let's highlight a few. Number 1, church unity and hierarchy. One of the dominant themes in the writings is the emphasis on unity within the Christian community. We see this in Clement's concern for resolving disputes in Corinth and Ignatius's insistence on the authority of the bishop. For them, the church was a structured, unified body, much more than just a collection of believers. Number 2 is martyrdom and suffering. For Ignatius and Polycarp, the prospect of martyrdom was not something to be avoided, but embraced. They saw their suffering as a way to share in the sufferings of Christ. This was a powerful and radical way of understanding Christian identity in the face of Roman persecution. Third, doctrine and orthodoxy. The Apostolic Fathers were also concerned with preserving the teachings of the apostles. While they didn't have a fully developed New Testament canon as we do today, they frequently quoted from what we now recognize as the New Testament and placed a high value on apostolic tradition. Their writings helped to form the foundation for later Christian doctrinal development. Number 4, moral instruction. From the Didache to Polycarp's letter to the Philippians, there is a strong emphasis on practical Christian living. These writings focus on how Christians should behave in light of their faith, emphasizing virtues like charity, humility, and obedience. It is impossible to overstate the influence of the Apostolic Fathers on the development of Christian theology and practice. Their works helped shape the way Christians understood the Church's structure, authority, and the importance of staying true to the apostolic teachings. For example, the idea of bishops as spiritual leaders with authority over local churches can be traced back to Ignatius's letters. This concept would later become a foundational element of the Church's structure, particularly in Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and in many Anglican and Lutheran traditions. Moreover, the Apostolic Fathers laid the groundwork for key theological debates that would arise in later centuries about the nature of Christ, the role of tradition, and the interpretation of Scripture. Their focus on unity and orthodoxy would resonate in the ecumenical councils that followed as the Church sought to define its core doctrines. Now you might be wondering, why should we even care about the Apostolic Fathers today? After all, they lived almost 2,000 years ago. Well, here are a few reasons. Number one, historical continuity. The Apostolic Fathers give us a direct link to the apostles and the earliest Christians. If we want to understand how Christian theology and practice developed, we have to start with them. Number two, a model of faithfulness. The courage and devotion of figures like Polycarp and Ignatius provide a powerful example of faith in the face of persecution. Their willingness to die for their beliefs is both challenging and inspiring for Christians today. Number three, foundations of church practice. Many of the practices we take for granted today, like the role of bishops, the structure of worship, and even certain prayers, find their origins in the writings of the Apostolic Fathers. Understanding these roots can enrich our own spiritual practices and appreciation for the Church's history. And that's going to wrap it up for our first video in our new series called Faith Foundations. The Apostolic Fathers may not be household names for many, but their contributions to the early church were monumental. They preserved the teachings of the apostles and passed them on to future generations, ensuring that the faith would continue to grow and thrive. Thanks for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. And as always, if you have any questions or topics that you'd like to cover in future segments, feel free to reach out. Until next time, keep digging into the foundations of your faith.